I have twice lost certain items which I absolutely know for certain were either randomly deleted in the mailbox when I was trying to open all my mail, or they simply just disappeared from my bag, or they disappeared during a trade. And I asked GMs to look into this, and because it was so long before a GM replied, they couldn't look back far enough to see what had happened, so they just gave me just a really poor excuse. Alright guys, today we're going to be looking at some of the differences between the original Wrath of the Lich King and Wrath of the Lich King Classic, because I thought it'd be interesting to see how different the game we're playing is compared to the original, because I think many people have actually forgotten what the original was actually like. Following this video, we're actually going to look at some of the extremely overpowered abilities that had to be nerfed during Wrath of the Lich King's lifetime also, so stay tuned for that. And the best way to do that obviously is to subscribe. So let's first of all look at some big PvE changes that have been made. When it comes to raids, obviously Naxxramas was slightly buffed. In my opinion, not buffed enough, but nonetheless it was different health values and damage values to the original Wrath of the Lich King. And according to data mining and stuff we're seeing on the PTR, this is going to continue into Old War, because it seems like their spells are again doing more damage and health pools are bigger. So we can definitely expect the raids to be slightly more challenging than they were in the original Wrath of the Lich King. However, because players have in general just become better at playing the game, it probably will still feel the same. In the future, they are also adding the Heroic Plus mode, which is an extra difficulty mode for the original Heroic Dungeons. And the bosses in this raid will actually drop Naxxramas loot, so it's basically a great catch-up feature for people joining Wrath of the Lich King late, or people wanting to gear up their alts. They also want to raise the item level of Ulduar gear to prevent Ulduar becoming irrelevant when the Trial of a Grand Crusader turns up. I am hoping that this means that the hard modes in Ulduar will be so hard that your standard average guild will not actually be able to complete them, or at least not be able to complete all of them until a Trial of a Grand Crusader actually turns up, and therefore for the more hardcore raider they will be a really good challenge. Badges have also changed dramatically. 10-man Naxxramas dropped Emblems of Heroism, not Valor. Obviously another big change is how there is no random dungeon finder, and instead we have the looking for group tool, which in my experience anyway, has actually turned out to be better than a random dungeon finder. Obviously also there is now a mechanic to reset cooldowns, especially the heroism debuff, when you wipe on a boss, providing you don't release too early anyway. You should get a weak aura to fix that issue. And they are also making certain trinkets unique to prevent people wearing two of the same trinket from different difficulty modes. You'll see this in Trial of a Grand Crusader. For instance, you won't be able to equip the heroic version of Death's Choice and the normal version. Now, moving on to more open world changes, obviously there's even more catch-up mechanics in the open world because quests will drop Emblems of Heroism. For instance, right now you can get 147 emblems from quests alone, which is an insane catch-up mechanic because you can get 2 pieces of your tier piece before you even step into a heroic dungeon. Layering was also not in the original Wrath. This meant that all players on the server had to share the same world, which meant that, farming nodes in the open world was much more difficult because you couldn't just change layer to where a particular node is already spawned and take advantage of that. In-game Game Master support was also much better. Back in the days there were actual real Game Masters that helped with certain issues in-game. You would sometimes actually get into a conversation with a Game Master who would actually slowly figure out what is your issue, and then they would fix things while you're still actually playing the game. Whereas these days, you wait like a week to just get an automated response that doesn't help you. I have twice lost certain items which I absolutely know for certain were either randomly deleted in the mailbox when I was trying to open all my mail, or they simply just disappeared from my bag, or they disappeared during a trade. And I asked GMs to look into this, and because it was so long before a GM replied, they couldn't look back far enough to see what had happened, so they just gave me just a really poor excuse. Whereas back in the day, like I once got my account hacked, And the next day, right, I had all of my loot back because everything on all my characters was totally deleted, by the way. The next day I got everything back. There's actually been a number of times where add-ons have been the issue as well, and a GM has told me, yo dude, this item is in your inventory, and I'd be like, oh right, well it must be an add-on, and then the issue is solved. But this is just not a thing anymore. Also, rather weirdly, there's no quest helper in the game, you still have to download an add-on. By the way guys, obviously the best add-on for this, if you are still leveling your characters or getting some alts leveled up, is going to be Rested XP. This is the best way to level in Wrath of the Lich King. Might be slightly less than doing some kind of like crazy AoE open world farming, but while you're questing, you farm a truckload of gold also in the process. And Rested XP has the best route that you can take level 1 all the way to level 80, to the point where you can really just kind of switch off and chill and not stress and just follow the little blue arrow. The quest helper was eventually added in patch 3.3 in original Wrath of the Lich King, so maybe it will happen, you know, in a later phase of Classic Wrath, who knows. The Barbershop didn't have as many features either. You couldn't change your gender, yes it is gender, and you also couldn't change your face. And the extra hairstyles that you got in the Barbershop weren't actually originally available when you made your character for the first time, because now when you make a character you get all of the hairstyles, whereas originally you had to go to Barbershop to get the extra hairstyles. And now for some totally bizarre and stupid reason you can make a Death Knight without having a pre-existing level 55 character, which has obviously spawned a big, and I mean a big, bot epidemic. It's got much worse since I made that little video about why so many Death Knights are in Badlands. There's also been a number of PvP changes. The biggest one, obviously, is Winter Grasp, which, in my opinion, has been done totally dirty. Anyway, previously, you could only get in at level 75, now you can actually get in at level 71. Back in original Wrath, Winter Grasp was just a total open area when the war was active and anyone could just join by entering. All you had to do was, like, inflict some damage to the enemy and you were allowed to stay in. This was before 3.2 because then they added a queuing system where obviously it would make a raid group for you, similar to a battleground, but yeah, before that, people had to make their own raid group and go into Winter Grasp on their own. Winter Grasp was also just a realm thing, it wasn't cross-realm how we know it today, or, you know, even cross-faction. So there could only be one active war per realm, and it took around about 15 minutes, and you had to be chosen to enter, you didn't always guarantee yourself to actually get inside. There was also a portal that existed that you can quickly jump down to Winter Grasp with, but for some reason that isn't in the game, even when you actually have Winter Grasp under your control. In original Wrath, it really did matter whether you lost Winter Grasp or not, because then you simply just couldn't enter via way. Now, obviously that probably wasn't going to work on balanced realms, but they could have had a failsafe thing happen where, you know, if one faction loses like 4 times in a row, just let the other faction win. At the end of the day, it's just like one boss, and then in later phases it's going to be a couple bosses that people will do once a week. I just don't think Winter Grasp is as cool anymore. Like, it could have been the only essence of Wrath of the Lich King where the open world and faction rivalry actually was a thing and actually mattered like it did in Vanilla WoW, but now none of this exists, and it is a shame in my opinion. There's also been some differences made to the arena system. Back in the day, you didn't have your personal rating, you had team rating and actually had to spend gold on making a team. When you made a team, you actually started on 1500 rating, whereas now you start on 0. Also, the rating requirements on all of the PvP gear has been reduced by, you know, sometimes about 400, sometimes just 200 or 100. Also, Hateful gear actually did have a rating requirement, whereas now you just need arena points or emblems of Valor. But they did keep the requirements for, you know, belt boots and the weapons and wands, idols and sigils and all that kind of thing. They also added the savage weapons to Wrath of the Lich King Classic, whereas back in the day this wasn't a thing. It was on the original Wrath of the Lich King beta, but didn't make it to the live game. In original Wrath, there was also an extra arena map called the Ring of Valor. This is the one where you actually go up on the moving platforms or the lifts, And there was a lot of dynamic mechanics like fire traps and more platforms that raised you up, which would obviously give the healer some breathing room. And the problem is that, well, they decided to remove it because it did heavily favour melee comps. Because obviously both teams would start pretty much in melee range of each other, and yeah, the melee could get a really good advantage. I think they should have just changed it to like have entrances at either side of the arena rather than totally removing it, in my opinion. Also, in the original Wrath, there wasn't this 10% healing reduction in arenas, which is now present. Well, it was present in the Icecrown Citadel patch, but previous to that it wasn't. The idea was that, you know, as healers got better gear, they scaled really, really well. And it also meant that, yeah, they were just healing a bit too much, so they had to reduce it. But the problem is now that, well, healers are in worse gear than when they implemented that 10% healing reduction. So now healing is just a little bit harder for healers in general in the arena, and you know, some healers don't like that. And lastly, there was also obviously not certain in-game shop options, like for instance the character boost. But in the original Wrath of the Lich King there was actually more shop options, like changing your race and also your faction. But anyway guys, those are all of the major gameplay changes that have changed specifically in Wrath of the Lich King Classic. That's where I'm going to leave it there. Be sure to check out my second channel, MetaGoblin, where I upload videos that are not related to World of Warcraft. Anyway, my name is MetaGoblin. To my next video, ciao.